The tariff and trade war with the U.S. is taking a tough turn for Canada's auto sector.
Stellantis saying it is moving production of its Jeep Compass from Ontario to the United States, and the automaker had previously paused production at that facility in Brampton in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff.
Auto giant Stellantis is driving some of its production away from Canada to the U.S.
In the closing weeks of 2025, the North American automotive landscape has been transformed by a series of trade policy decisions that began earlier in the year when the United States government under President Donald Trump introduced a sweeping new tariff regime aimed at reshaping where vehicles and parts are made. The measures include a baseline 25% tariff on all passenger vehicles and light trucks imported from Canada and Mexico, along with escalating duties on automotive parts that do not meet strict new domestic content thresholds. These changes were framed as necessary to protect American jobs, address border security concerns, and bring manufacturing back home. The effects have rippled across the continent, forcing every major automaker to re-evaluate decades-old production strategies that were built on the assumption of largely frictionless cross-border trade under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. One of the clearest and most symbolic examples of this shift involves Stellantis, the multinational giant that owns Jeep, Ram, Dodge, Chrysler, Peugeot, Citroën, and a host of other brands. In October 2025, Stellantis unveiled a $13 billion investment package for its North American operations spread across the next 4 years. The centerpiece of that announcement was the decision to relocate production of the next-generation Jeep Compass from the Brampton Assembly Plant in Ontario, Canada, to the long-idled Belvidere Assembly Plant in Illinois. The company is pouring more than $600 million into reopening and modernizing Belvidere, a facility that has been essentially mothballed since early 2023. When the new lines come online in 2027, Belvidere will build both the Jeep Compass and the Jeep Cherokee, creating approximately 1,450 direct jobs and several thousand more in the surrounding supply chain across the American Midwest. The announcement was greeted with celebration in Illinois. Local politicians, union representatives, and community leaders gathered for a high-profile groundbreaking ceremony where speakers described the project as proof that American manufacturing was experiencing a genuine renaissance. Yet only a few hundred kilometers north in Brampton, the mood was dramatically different. The Brampton plant had already begun expensive retooling work to prepare for the electrified version of the Compass when Stellantis abruptly paused the project earlier in 2025, citing the changing trade environment. Canadian federal and provincial officials reacted swiftly. Industry Minister Melanie Joly sent a formal letter to Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares reminding the company that relocating the Compass violated binding commitments made in exchange for billions of dollars in prior government incentives and loans. The Canadian government has since launched a formal dispute resolution process and has made clear it is prepared to seek repayment of funds or impose penalties if Stellantis does not maintain its full operational footprint in the country. Stellantis has responded by emphasizing that Canada remains a vital part of its future. The company points to the addition of a third shift at its Windsor minivan plant, continued investment in the Windsor battery joint venture with LG Energy Solution, and vague promises of future product for Brampton once the current uncertainty clears. Nevertheless, the immediate loss of the Compass program has cast a shadow over thousands of Canadian workers and has become a rallying point for those arguing that aggressive unilateral tariffs ultimately hurt more North American jobs than they protect. The financial impact of the new tariff structure has been substantial and immediate. Independent analysis from the Anderson Economic Group published in November 2025 estimates that the big three U.S. automakers plus their foreign-owned competitors operating in America have already paid more than $11 billion in tariff-related duties on parts and vehicles imported from Canada and Mexico in the first 10 months of the year alone. Stellantis itself reported a preliminary net loss of approximately $2.7 billion for the first half of 2025, with executives openly attributing a significant portion of that red ink to tariff exposure, inventory write-downs, and restructuring costs linked to the shifting production footprint. These higher costs have created powerful incentives for every automaker selling significant volumes in the United States to move as much final assembly as possible south of the border. The pattern is now repeating across the industry, with announcement after announcement revealing plans to expand or repurpose American factories. Mercedes-Benz confirmed in September that it will bring production of the next-generation GLC crossover to its Tuscaloosa, Alabama plant beginning in late 2027, a model that had previously been built exclusively in Europe and Asia. Volvo followed suit in October, announcing that the XC60 plug-in hybrid will join the lineup at its Ridgeville, South Carolina facility starting in 2026, with executives hinting that additional models could follow if tariff conditions remain stable. BMW has gone even further, revealing plans to dramatically expand electric and electrified SUV production at its massive Spartanburg, South Carolina complex. New electric versions of the X5, X6, and X7 will roll off the same lines as their combustion and hybrid counterparts, while entirely new dedicated electric models on the upcoming new E-Class architecture are also slated for U.S. production later in the decade. Japanese manufacturers who have long relied on Mexican and Canadian plants for high-volume models sold in America have moved with particular urgency. Honda confirmed that the next-generation Civic Hybrid will be built exclusively in Ohio rather than Mexico, and that CR-V production will be expanded in multiple U.S. states, with some volume shifting away from its longtime plant in Alliston, Ontario. The company has been careful to reassure Canadian workers that overall production levels in Ontario will be maintained through new export markets, but the writing is on the wall that future growth will be concentrated in the United States. Toyota is following an almost identical playbook, increasing RAV4 output at its plants in Kentucky and Indiana, while reallocating some Canadian-built volume to other global markets. Nissan has executed perhaps the most dramatic pivot of all, announcing the closure of 2 assembly plants in Mexico and the transfer of Rogue, Pathfinder, and future crossover production to its massive complexes in Tennessee and Mississippi. The company has even revived the storied Xterra nameplate, confirming that the rugged body-on-frame SUV will return in 2028, built entirely in the United States. While these shifts have delivered undeniable job gains in American factory towns, they have also exposed the hidden costs of protectionism. Industry-wide vehicle production costs in the United States have risen by an average of $2,000 to $3,000 per unit, according to data compiled by the Center for Automotive Research. Supply chains that were painstakingly optimized over decades for just-in-time delivery across borders are now tangled in paperwork, duties, and delays. Electronic components, wiring harnesses, and stamped steel parts that used to cross the border multiple times during the build process now carry cumulative tariff burdens that can exceed 35% in some cases. The result has been widespread production slowdowns, unplanned downtime, and in several instances temporary layoffs, even at plants that were supposed to be the beneficiaries of the new policy. Canadian policymakers watched these developments with growing alarm, but chose a markedly different response from the public confrontation and rhetoric that sometimes characterized earlier trade disputes. Instead of matching tariff with tariff, Ottawa and the provinces doubled down on a long-term industrial strategy centered on electrification and battery production. The results have been striking. The NextStar energy joint venture between Stellantis and LG Energy Solution in Windsor, Ontario, completed construction of its massive gigafactory ahead of schedule in 2025. Although slower than expected electric vehicle demand has led the partners to initially prioritize battery production for grid-scale energy storage systems, the plant is fully operational, employing more than 2,500 people and retaining the technical capability to switch to automotive packs as market conditions improve. Federal and provincial incentives for the project total more than 15 billion Canadian dollars spread over a decade, making it one of the most heavily supported industrial projects in the country's history. Not to be outdone, Volkswagen broke ground on its PowerCo battery cell factory in St. Thomas, Ontario, representing a $16.7 billion commitment and the single largest industrial investment Canada has ever received. When fully ramped up in 2027, the plant will have an annual capacity of 90 gigawatt-hours, enough to supply batteries for roughly 1 million electric vehicles per year. Combine these two facilities plus additional plants under discussion with Northvolt, Honda, LG, and others have transformed southern Ontario into one of the densest battery production clusters on the planet. Green foreign direct investment into Canada surged 48% in the first 3 quarters of 2025, despite the turmoil in traditional assembly operations. This strategic pivot has been accompanied by an equally ambitious workforce transition program. The federal government, working with Ontario and Quebec, launched a $450 million retraining initiative targeting 50,000 workers at risk from shifting production patterns. Training centers in Windsor, Oshawa, Brampton, and St. Therese now offer accelerated programs in battery cell manufacturing, power electronics, software-defined vehicle architecture, and advanced automation. Many laid-off assembly line workers who once bolted body panels or installed dashboards are now becoming certified technicians capable of operating the highly automated lines of the electric future. Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, has played a central role by negotiating transition agreements that guarantee income support and priority hiring at the new battery plants for workers displaced from combustion engine facilities. The contrast between the two countries' approaches could hardly be sharper. In the United States, protectionist tariffs have succeeded in pulling significant volumes of traditional SUV and pickup production back across the border, creating headlines and ribbon-cutting ceremonies in the short term. In Canada, the response has been quieter, but arguably more forward-looking, building an ecosystem that positions the country to dominate the supply chain for the vehicles that will define the next 2 decades. While American plants scramble to add capacity for internal combustion and hybrid models that may face declining demand as emissions regulations tighten, Canadian facilities are locking in the high-value intellectual property and manufacturing know-how for the electrified era. Economists have begun describing this dynamic as the great divergence in North American automotive strategy. The United States has optimized for the present market, winning back assembly jobs for vehicles that consumers are still buying in large numbers today. Canada has optimized for the market of 2030 and beyond, betting that leadership in batteries, critical minerals processing, and software will prove more durable than traditional stamping and welding. Early evidence suggests both strategies are working on their own terms, but neither is without risk. American manufacturers face the danger that higher costs will erode competitiveness against Asian and European rivals who continue to enjoy largely tariff-free access to their home markets. Canadian manufacturers face the challenge that battery demand has grown more slowly than anticipated, forcing some plants to pivot temporarily to stationary storage or delay full automotive production. As 2025 draws to a close, the industry finds itself in a period of profound transition. Supply chains are being redrawn almost monthly as companies chase the lowest landed cost under the new rules. Workers in some communities are celebrating new opportunities while others are grappling with uncertainty. Governments on both sides of the border are spending tens of billions of taxpayer dollars to shape outcomes, with mixed results so far. Consumers have yet to feel the full impact, but most analysts expect vehicle prices in the United States to rise by several $1,000s on average over the next 2 to 3 years as tariff costs work their way through the system. What happens next will depend heavily on political developments in Washington. If the tariff regime remains in place or intensifies, more permanent relocations are inevitable, and some Canadian assembly plants may face an existential threat. If negotiations lead to exemptions or a phased return to lower duties, many of the emergency shifts announced in 2025 could be reversed. Either way, the integrated North American auto industry that emerged from the original 1965 Auto Pact and was modernized through NAFTA and then USMCA has been fundamentally altered. The era of treating the continent as a single manufacturing platform is over, at least for now. The story that began with celebration in Belvidere and concern in Brampton has become much larger than any single plant or model. It is a story about how quickly decades of careful integration can unravel under political pressure and how difficult it is to rebuild resilient industries in the face of rapid technological change. It is a reminder that protectionism rarely delivers the clean victories promised on campaign stages, and that the path to genuine industrial strength often lies in long-term planning rather than short-term confrontation. Yet amid the disruption, there are also signs of adaptation and opportunity. Workers are learning new skills. Billions of dollars are flowing into next-generation factories.